Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to week 21. What an exciting year we've had with all the great topics. Tonight, we've got Jorden Nash talking about video codecs. I have absolutely no idea what that is, so I'm looking forward to learning a whole bunch. So, Jorden, you've got the floor.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed. What is a video codec? That's a great question, and we'll try to answer some of that today. Just a quick background on myself. I've only used xLights for 2 years, and actually the way that I found xLights was I was looking for a software that could take video and map it to pixels. And lo and behold, xLights popped out, and it's kind of been a fun little journey finding xLights, but that's originally how I found it, was through video. I know video long before I know lights. So I've been doing video for quite a few years. Went to school for that, and I just love doing things with video. And now that I have this new medium, which is the lighting, and kind of tying the two together, it just really makes me excited. I also do a fun projection mapping show on my house. So that's just a quick background about me. So an overview of today's xEssentials presentation. We're going to talk about the different parts of a video file. A video file is, a file that has all these different elements inside of it that actually make it a playable video file. Then we'll kind of dive into xLights for a minute, and we'll talk about how xLights sees video files and decodes them. And then we'll just show briefly a few different ways to use the video effect. So let's jump in at parts of a video file. These are different elements that are all ones and zeros that compress into the video file that you have. And the parts of a video file are the container, the codec, container and codec, and then the compression is the way that the video is compressed inside of the file. We'll also talk about the image size, frame rate, and bit depth. Why are these things important? Why do we even care about how video files are made? Well, kind of a few reasons. A main one is how can I store all these video files on my computer and have them not take tons and tons and tons and tons of space? I don't know. I like to think of it of a XML file, an xLights XML file versus an FSEQ file. XML file is just the pieces and parts versus an FSEQ file is like the entire sequence that's all rendered out. That was probably a bad analogy. I think that'll make more sense as we continue on. What is a video container? So we'll talk about containers and codecs first. And these are two different things, and both make up the video as far as the stream of ones and zeros. The video container, I also sometimes hear it referred to as a shell. It is the extension. So the ending .mp4 is probably a common one. MOV, there's a number of different ones. Those ones are pretty common. AVI, there's several of them. And it's the glass, the bucket that holds everything together. So inside of this glass, let's say a water glass, you have all these different pieces inside of it. You have a video stream, you have an audio stream, and metadata. What is metadata? Metadata is data about the data that tells what codec the file is. And we'll get into what a codec is in a second. Now, metadata might also include things like if you took a picture, when did you take the picture? It could have GPS coordinates. It could tell you your image or video size. It could tell you your bit rate, your bit depth. It could even give you copyright information. All these other data pieces, which are just text, that aren't actually part of the video, excuse me, but just good things to have in the as part of the file. So we have the video stream, the audio stream, and the metadata. Let's go into types of containers. And some of these might look a little bit familiar. And of course, there's many more than these. These are some of the more popular ones. WMV, which is a Windows format. FLV, Flash, MOV. And that's just the general name for movie. MP4, AVI. I'm sure that you've probably seen some of these. Some of these sound kind of familiar. So what is a video codec, and how is a codec different than the container? Remember, the containers are glass, and it has the video and the audio and the metadata streams inside of it. How is a codec different? Well, codec is the way that the software packetizes and codes and decodes the ones and zeros to make the video more accessible. It's kind of like a protocol of how the ones and zeros are packetized and put into this container. So the word codec is a combination of the words coder and decoder. So a codec is kind of I think of it as a little piece of software. I don't know if I have a good analogy of this. I wish I did. So it's a piece of software that tells how the ones and zeros should go into the container. And then you also need that same codec or piece of software on the device playing the video to decode everything and bring the ones and zeros back into a visual form that we as humans can view it. I hope that makes sense. And that's what a codec is. So types of codecs are H.264 or AVC, Advanced Video Coding, H.265, which is a bit newer, high efficiency video coding, MPEG-1, MPEG-2, MPEG-4, and DivX, and there's a few others. These ones are kind of the most popular ones. The most popular, especially for web videos, and I'd recommend it for xLights, is H.264. And that brings us into compression. How does compression work? Now, if I were to take an image, video is a series of images. So if I were to just take a picture, it would be, let's say, a few megabytes, and then you were to take another picture, a fraction of a second later, most of the information would be the same. But why would I save, let's say, the 10 megabyte picture, and then take another picture a fraction of a second later and save another 10 megabytes when virtually nothing between those two pictures changed? This is how compression works. What compression can do is it can find similarities between your frames of video and duplicate that information. So it'll say, okay, at frame 1, here's what your picture looks like. Now in frame 2, use all the information from frame 1, but these few little things changed. So just save that data. On frame 3, just these little things changed from frame 2 and from frame 1, so just save this data. So you can see how that could be very efficient as far as hard drive space goes by only saving the information that changes in between frames. Now that's one form of video compression. There's also many other different ways, like if you have a panning shot, it'll take information and just kind of repeat it on the sides and just give you the new information. Here's the downfall of that. Number one, it takes a lot more processing to encode and decode these files. And number two, because if I'm on frame, let's say 3, I don't actually have the entire frame. I only have that little piece that changed, right? So I have to go back to frame 1, grab the entire frame, and then kind of interpolate or figure out what has changed between frame 2 and frame 3, and then I can build frame 3. So it just takes a lot of processing, which isn't a bad thing. Our computers nowadays are amazing. We watch YouTube videos all the time, and that compresses and decompresses almost flawlessly. And it's really quite incredible what, over the years and the history of video compression, how video compression engineers, I'll call them, have made these codecs to be very, very efficient and get as high a quality as video as possible, and still make the video file as small as possible, especially for storage and more especially for streaming online video. Okay, that was a mouthful. The next part of a video file is the image size. Now, the image size is exactly what you think of it is. High definition would be 1920 by 1080, and that's the pixel count. It has 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. And that's just the size of your image. Now, the way that xLights scales images is it takes your video, and depending, on your frame buffer and scaling and stuff, and we'll get into that in a second, it will take your video layer and scale it onto whatever object you are fitting it onto, which may be one object, maybe one matrix, or maybe a number of objects. It may be a whole house effect, which you put a video over the entire house, and xLights will figure out what pixel is where, and it will scale the video and it does it quite efficiently. As a side note, xLights uses a library called libav, Libav, and that's an open source library, and that's kind of the back end of xLights. And that takes, that's the processing end, and that's the thing that takes all these different containers and codecs and compressions and can decode them and figure out what pixels are where and how to scale them and how to, reassemble those ones and zeros into a video file. And then xLights will then take that image and then map it onto the pixels. The closer the size of the video to the object that you're mapping it to in video, the quicker it will render. If I have a matrix that's only 10 pixels by 10 pixels, why would I feed it a high definition signal that's 1920 by 1080? xLights and its back-end processing and libraries have to work that much harder to try and fit the video and scale it inside of that matrix. So there's a number of ways, and we'll get into this in a second, that we can scale video with a free software, and rather quickly we can scale videos to take a lot less rendering and processing time inside of xLights, especially if you're making changes and you're rendering a lot. So next is the frame rate. The way that xLights sees frame rate is it will round to the nearest frame of video. Now, I work in the broadcast world a lot, and I'm using NTSC, which is kind of the North American standard of video, which means I use 30 frames a second a lot in a lot of my videos. Some of these frame rates might look familiar. Oh, sorry, let me finish that thought first. 30 frames per second. The way that xLights will do it, if I have a 40 frame per second video sequence and a 30 frame per second video, oh no, what's it going to do? Now, if you don't have speed controls turned on, and we'll get into the video effect when we hop into xLights, what it will do is play them back at the same speed, but oh no, I have a frame rate mismatch. I have a 30 frame per second video, but I have a 40 frame per second video sequence. What does xLights do? xLights will round to the nearest frame of video. What that means is if I have a frame rate that's lower than my sequence frame rate, xLights will duplicate frames. Or the opposite, if my frame rate is higher, let's say I have a 30 frame per second video, then my sequence, let's say my sequence is 20 frames per second, then xLights will be forced to automatically duplicate frames, and you'll see about every 5 frames or so is duplicated. Now, when we're working in pixels, that's probably not a big deal. Okay, on to common frame rates. 23976 and 24, those are North American film standards. 25, some of you that live in Asia or Europe or I think Australia, see 25 pop up a lot. 2997, 5994, and 60. Why the decimals and the weird frame rates, that's a whole different topic. Why is it 2997 and 30, and why are they different? It's to do with electric conversion and the frequency of your lights flashing and all crazy stuff like that. Anyways, I won't get into that. But just so you realize there is a difference between 23976 and 24. They are different frame rates. And sometimes you work with all of these when you're doing video things. Long story short, you don't really have to worry about this or the containers or whatnot, because xLights just takes care of it all. Shout out to the developers. They've done a great job with it. Next thing is bit depth. Bit depth is the amount of colors in each of the red, green, and blue channels. And if you have alpha or transparency information in your video, it has that in the bit depth as well. 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit, 16-bit, these are all very common bit depths. And this is, image down here is just a coarse representation of what different bit depth looks like. So there's just less colors, less information to deal with, but it makes the file sizes smaller. Which when you're working with pixels, that's just fine. 8-bit is mostly what I work in, and you can go lower or higher than that. The lower the bit depth contributes to banding. Now look at this red image on the right side. We have an 8-bit on the left, and then a 24-bit on the right. And you can see this ring effect, and we call that banding. And that's where there just isn't enough color information between two different gradations of red, green, or blue. So you get just this line. And Again, for most of what we work with, that's just fine. But the higher the bit depth, better. So just a part of video. So let's pause there and come into video converters, and we'll hop into xLights for a minute and kind of show you some of the video effect and kind of go from there. So I found, well, rather a really good friend of mine suggested to me any video converter. I use Adobe software, and that comes with its own converter, which is called Media Encoder, and it looks something like this. And you drag in your footage, and then you have a number of outputs that you can just drag onto the footage and set your output, etc., and you're good to go. This one, however, is free. And it's called Any Video Converter, AVC, and they have a Windows and a Mac version. If you're trying to save on hard drive space, or trying to reduce your file size, or trying to compress, or convert, or change your image size, this would be a great tool. So I'm on a Mac. I, of course, downloaded the for Mac version, and this is what it looks like, Any Video Converter. And inside of here, I have a convert video and a download video tab. This, as I've found recently, is a fantastic video downloader. So not that I endorse this, but let's hop over to YouTube and do a search on a Christmas background, and let's find one. I do not want one that's 10 hours long. That would be bad. Let's find this one right here. Christmas background seamless loop, and it's only 10 seconds. Perfect. Copy the file extension, hop over to Any Video Converter, and hit add URL. Okay. Now it is parsing it, which means it's talking to YouTube and it's seeing what kind of video codecs YouTube has available, codecs and resolutions. I'm going to go with the MP4 at the highest resolution. Let's actually, why not? Let's go for 1080. We go for a 1920 by 1080 MPEG-4. It's only 2.6 megabytes because it's only 10 seconds, so that sounds about right. But I also have these other formats like WebM and M4A, which is an MPEG-4 format-ish. Let's just do my MPEG-4 1920 by 1080. Hey, hit OK. I'm going to download it into my downloads folder. Hit start download, and this actually goes pretty fast to download. Okay, next, let's look in my downloads folder and find that file that I just found, that I just downloaded, and it's right there. Now, in my project, I'd recommend keeping your files organized. I have my master folder, xEssentials Codecs. I have a video folder, and I have a xLights folder. So in my videos folder, I'm going to drag this and put it in my videos folder. Great, there it is. Okay. And I'm going to rename this, let's call it green ornament. I bet I spelled that wrong. Okay, let's hop into xLights. Well, soapbox for a second. You know, I'd highly recommend keeping files organized. This really helps me a lot, especially when working with lots of sequences, xLights folders, video folders. You know, as soon as you download a video, don't just leave it in your downloads folder, actually put it into a place that's meaningful. So when you come back to it in 5 years, you can go back and find exactly where that file is. Okay, enough soapbox. Let's go into xLights. Again, I have my xLights directory set in the same master folder. And hit OK and come into my layout. I already went ahead and made a matrix, and I made it pretty coarse. It's 320 by 1080. And that is actually a 16:9 ratio, which if I were to take a 1920 by 1080 video, it would be the same ratio. Ratio meaning the division between the width and the height. If you take 1920 by 1080, it's the same ratio as 16:9, which is the same ratio as 320 by 180. I hope that made sense. So I just have a generic matrix. Let's hop into my sequencer. I've already made a new sequence. Just an animation at 40 frames per second. I have a few timing marks in here. Let's go ahead and drag the video effect down. And this is where things get cool. Oh no, it's red. What does that mean? That means xLights does not have a video file or it has a path to a file that doesn't exist. So for some of you that participated in xLights around the world, some of you may have seen this last year, where Ryan used some video elements and you render it out and, oh no, I have red. So that's something to look out for this year, as I'm sure that we're going to be using some video elements in it. So this is the easy way to fix it. Come down to your effects settings, click on Browse, and navigate to the ornament file. Okay, I'm going to hit Open. Let's move this all the way to 30 seconds. And I'm going to hit the duration treatment to loop. So it's maintaining frame rate, and it's just looping. Now, it's doing a pretty good job at rendering. You see a few little flickers here and some dropped frames. I'm going to go ahead and hit Render. Now, before I do that, I know it's going to take a little bit because I'm scaling a video that's 1920 by 1080 onto a matrix that's 320 by 180. So it needs to do a little bit of work, and it's trying to extrapolate all those frames and scale them, and my frame rate does not match up with my sequence rate, so it has to round. You know, there's quite a bit of stuff that it's doing on in the backend. So let's hit Render, and I have my render bar at the bottom. Now, while that's doing that, just because I know that that's going to take a little while, let's hop open to over to Video Converter. And just to show you how this works, I'm going to grab the same file, drag it in, and come over here to the profile. And we have a whole bunch of different profiles or output codecs and containers that any video converter can output to. I'm going to come down to the bottom and use, oh, nope, not the bottom. Let's do this film strip with a little globe inside of it. We can do Flash, HTML5, GIF animations, which actually work inside of xLights. No, they don't. I'm just kidding. Flash animations work. GIFs do not. As far as my tests go, I'm going to go to YouTube, which gives you a H.264. See, right there. It's a YouTube H.264 video, and that's the codec. The shell is .mp4. Now inside of here, I'm going to come down to frame, and I'm going to change it to the smallest I possibly can. I'm going to go right there, 320 by 240, which is actually the exact same size as my matrix. Hit OK, and hit Convert Now. Now notice as I'm converting it there, a new little proxy file shows up there, and it converted it very, very quickly. I'm going to rename this low res. And let's just look at the file size here. We have 1920 by 1080 at 20 seconds is 2.6 megabytes. The low res version, 426 by 240, is 92 kilobytes. That's tiny. Okay, let's look at them. Let me just do a quick preview. Looks beautiful. Let's go to the low res one. Looks slightly less beautiful. You can see all the pixelation, and that's just because it's such a tiny file. Let's zoom this in. Kind of see what it's doing. There's a lot of, it almost looks like JPEG artifacting. Yeah, it just looks like junk. But on a matrix, it'll look great, and it'll render great too. So come back to here. Let's look at my render time here in the bottom left. My 1920 by 1080 video took 18.677 seconds to render. Let's change over to the low-res version, hit render again, and see if it's any shorter. And I bet you it will be. Now, is this process worth it? I think so, especially if you're doing a lot of video elements and you're rendering over and over again. So I saved about 5 seconds there. But again, this is only a 30-second animation, and I'm only mapping on one object. When you're doing whole house effects, or you have a lot of video effects, it might be in your best interest to downscale your video to a more manageable size. Okay, next, I'm going to pop this back to, well, no, that actually looks okay. I'm going to keep this on the lower res version and show you a few other things about the video effect here. Maintain aspect ratio. We already talked about what an aspect ratio is, and that's the ratio of the width to the height. So why it's compressed here? Well, there. I mean, it's not compressed there. That's your preview. So your model and your house there. So there's your 16:9 right there. And then this is scaling it over the entire matrix, which, you know, is a different ratio, and it's also the size of these windows. So as I move the windows, you can see how that video size changes there. I'm going to skip this one for this xEssentials class. Go into the crop settings. Now the crop will not only crop the video, but it will scale it to make sure that the video fills the whole frame. So I can crop the left side or crop the top. You notice that the bottom now stretches, or I can crop the right side and the left now stretches. And you can do similar things with the frame buffer. Okay, where are we? We're on to the black, transparent black. This is kind of a fun one. You can have videos that have black information in them. Let's find a good one here that has a lot of black. There we go, kaleidoscope effect. Take a peek at this. That looks pretty, but notice this has a lot of black in it. So instead of using the layer blending, I can, inside of the video effect, have it do the black and take anything that's black and make that transparent for me. So let's grab a butterfly effect, drop it underneath there, and it's doing a rough job trying to render it, kind of. Okay, let's hit render. And actually, I'm going to shorten this down even more to about 10 seconds. Make a timing mark. Okay, let's hit render. It's rendering pretty fast. One thing to mention while it's rendering, if you check transparent black, that means that it's taking the black information out of the video and making it transparent and showing through to the effects underneath it. But I can also check or move this slider, and that's the amount of black that it will make transparent. So from pure black to black into like very dark grays if I move the slider up. Render again. The reason I'm having to render again is because I have that huge video file, 1920 by 1080, and mushing it down into here. Now, if I were to compress this into a smaller file, these render times would be much less. Now, notice there, the video is hardly visible because it's passing into the dark grays and the medium, the darker grays into the medium grays, and it's making all that transparent. Now, let's move this black all the way down here. Try it again, and now just the the very darkest parts of the image should go transparent. It'll pop up here in just a sec. There it is. Beautiful. Look at that. So pretty. So pretty. Now, why would you really need a kaleidoscope effect from a video now that we have shaders? Yeah, that's a conversation for another day. Okay, let's do another effect, and I'll show you just one or two more things about this effect, just fun things that we can do. Let's grab a, let's grab that one. Looks kind of party-ish and cool, and I bet that that would show up really cool in some whole house effects. And let's do a spirals effect on top of it. Actually, I'm going to delete that for now just so I can set in my spirals effect. And let's turn this to all the way white. It's too white and yellow. Okay, and the video effect works just in the way that any other blending mode would. So what I'm going to show you is, so I'm red again. Let's set a video file, and actually I'm going to do the low resolution one. Now, wherever the spirals effect is over it, it of course takes priority because it's the layer on top. But if I take that layer and let's do layer 1 is an unmask, there we go. Now it's showing the green video only where the spirals are showing. Let's do true unmask, and that'll do the opposite of that. And then we can, do some other blending modes here. So if we were to do that, only where the spirals and the video are together intersect, that's where it's opaque, and then the other stuff is transparent. And I don't know why it went blue. Probably I need to render it. So let's move these forward. Now, just to show how that works, let's throw a butterfly underneath all of this. See if that works. It does not. Let's render. And that's because I have my top layer set as 1 as mask, which overrides everything below. So if I delete the video layer now, now I should have butterflies underneath it, which I do. Great. That's about as deep as I dare go into the video effect. I mean, it's a very, very powerful effect because you can take virtually any content there is out there and map it to your display. Another portion of this is using a file. And again, I'd recommend a H.264 inside of an MOV container or shell, and use that kind of a file to play back a video out of the HDMI port on a Raspberry Pi using Falcon Pi Player or Xschedule or things like that. Yeah, there's some really cool things you can do with video. So that's that. Let's see here. Let's hop back into the presentation and go into where I can find video content. Now, this is similar to the stuff that I presented on my presentation on projection mapping last year, but just kind of a review of some good places to find some video content. On videos.xlights.org, I believe it was Ryan Kaspercook points out a whole bunch of things on xEssentials about places to find video. So these are some of those, but you can find more from his xEssentials presentation almost exactly a year ago from now. VidEasy. Storyblocks. I use Storyblocks a lot. They do a monthly subscription and you can download whatever you want to. They have animations, actual footage, After Effects files. They do some great stuff here, and these are all animated. You can do a free 7-day trial, and then it's $100 a month or $200 a year, which is a killer deal for what you're getting. In the 7 days, I believe you get like 10 free downloads a day. And then, if you don't want the 7 days, you have to put in your credit card, so make sure you cancel it or else they're going to charge you. But you can get a few free clips that way. And I actually have done that, and it works out great. Envato, videohive.net has some great stuff, and I use them. And they also have a lot of good other stuff, graphics, photos, audio clips, music beds, and whatnot. I get a lot of my stock music from Envato. Palm 5, I believe this is a little bit more expensive, but they have some fun Christmas content. Atmos Effects, of course, they have Halloween and Christmas content. The Singing Pumpkin, this is something that you can take faces and map those or use those on a matrix quite easily. And they have some really cool singing faces, and the kids love this stuff. Like, I do this whole big show, and then I have like 3 tiny pumpkins in the corner, and that's everyone's favorite part, of course. You got to have the singing faces, right? They also have Christmas stuff. And then lightrageous.com has some stuff. Alrighty. Well, this is the last thing I want to talk about, and this is a friendly pitch for the xLights Around the World video 2019. Our song is going to be Little Drummer Boy. And I'm involved in the project. That's why I mentioned this in my presentation. An epic sequence will be provided by Mr. Kaspercook in September of 2019. And you're, of course, welcome to participate in the project. It's not mandatory. And you're welcome to use this sequence just as a stock to get you going, or use your own sequence. It does need to be that song, though. And then you have to film your display. You can't just submit a rendering of xLights and submit it by mid-December. And that date is likely December 15th. And that'll give me a week to put everything, compile everything, and edit it all. And the final video is slated to be released on December 22nd. Recently, a podcast was released about this whole project, and there's a ton of information on the podcast. And the link is right there, Spreaker.com/episode/yada yada. And also, I'd encourage you to visit xlightsaroundtheworld.com /2019. So I will show you both of those. Here is the Professional Triers podcast, all about the xLights Around the World. And Mr. McFarland is kind of the producer of this year's project. And then myself and Ryan Kaspercook are helping out on the back end. So I'd encourage you to listen to that. There's some fun stuff in there and a lot of information about the project. And then here's the site, xlightsaroundtheworld.com. And if you click in the top right corner, well, you can see the past years here. And if you click in the top right corner, this has updates about the song and links for purchasing the song. it's not official yet, but we'll likely be editing the song again just because the intro is so long, and there will be information posted on the Facebook page and a number of other places, as well as here if you want to be involved in that project. That is it.
Okay, thank you, Jorden. Learned quite a lot of good resources there. I appreciate it.
The xLights project exists because of people like you. Help continue the project by making a donation today at xlights.org/donate.